So what I'd like to do is talk about my real father. Many of you know who my father was, but I want to show you a sort of different side of him. You know, especially if you've seen Project Blue Book, and we're going to talk about that. You see this kind of almost robotic scientist. Scientists are not like that. I mean, many of you are scientists. You were just a little bit more focused as kids, and you went down this one interesting path. Now, I was a French major, so I go around chasing shiny balls all over the place. So, what I want to do is show you the real J. Allen Hynek. So, it's kind of funny to see the topic of UFOs in a banal game show like that back in the 60s. So my father did have a life other than UFOs and being a father. He was an astronomer. He put observatories all around the world to track the early days of the Apollo program and did one of the first citizen science projects. So here he is on the cover of Life magazine charting one of those observatories. This is an observatory that he had built at Northwestern, where he was chairman of the Department of Astronomy. The Lindheimer family granted the money to Northwestern. And my father said, well, that's great. I know a great place in New Mexico. Now, astronomers in general and UFO astronomers love them some New Mexico. So he said, I know a great spot there in Las Cruces. And they said, no, we want it here in Chicago so we can drive and see it. And he said, well, the lighting conditions aren't that great. And they said, it'll be here. So it became more of an educational facility, but it was really, really cool looking. Here he is looking at another telescope. And he's got all these kind of cool, science-y beatnik photos from around the world. And this is one of his proudest moments in his life. My father was a little Czech boy named Joey who grew up in Chicago. And he went by the name Alan because when he went to school, he joined a fraternity. They wanted him in the fraternity so that he could help pull up their collective GPA. He wanted to get in there so they could introduce him to girls. There were 2 Joeys in the fraternity, so he switched to Alan. So here's little Joey, the Czech boy, as, get this, the Grand Marshal of the Wilbur, Nebraska Czech Day Parade. Honors and awards don't get much bigger than that. So here he is in his native habitat. And you know, before computers, they had such wonderful, complex and complicated ways to illustrate things, either with sort of sculptures or with drawings. Here he is addressing United Nations on UFOs. So this is a letter. I don't know if you can see that. Can you make that out? Okay, so I can tell you it's anything and you won't know. So this is a letter from Arthur C. Clarke to my father, and I believe, it's 1967. And here he says, I have been shooting down UFO flying saucers for years, but am impressed by your arguments. My father received a lot of correspondence from people who said that they really didn't feel comfortable talking publicly, but privately had some questions or some doubts. So my father writes back, and he says, very nice to talk to you, and he says, I still don't know the answer, but I do know I would be derelict in my responsibility in my capacity of monitor of the noise level if I did not urge much closer attention to the subject. Okay, that's sort of cordial science speak, right? So at the end of the letter he says, I'm sure that 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was about to come out, will be up to you, as you can see in the third line, your awful standards. Okay, you want to hear a worse pun than that he had? Okay, so this is going to hurt. I hope you're sitting down because it's going to hurt. So one day my father was grading exams for his Highlights of Astronomy course. And I said, hey, Dad, can I take the test? And he goes, oh, sure, bozo. He called us bozo because he'd forget our names. And so I took the test, and it was mostly multiple choice, and I got a B. And I hadn't studied at all. And he's looking at me like, either this kid is smarter than I thought, or the test is a little bit too easy. I'm pretty sure he changed the test. So if any of you guys were in my father's class, I'm sorry. But then I looked at it and I said, hey, Dad, one of these names you have in the multiple choice is a goofy made-up name, Tycho Brahe. And my father said, Tycho Brahe is not a made-up name. And I said, okay, well, who is this guy, Dad? And he says, Tycho Brahe was the astronomer for the Holy Roman Emperor. And he was one of the best observationalist astronomers of all time. The only problem was he didn't really know what to do with the data. Now, he had an up-and-coming assistant astronomer by the name of Johannes Kepler, who was a math whiz. But Tycho Brahe wouldn't give Kepler the data. So one day, the Holy Roman Emperor comes to check out his investment. And they have a big state dinner. Now, I also need to mention Tycho Brahe was a real character. He had had his nose sliced off in a duel. So he had different nose fittings, like silver for weekdays, bronze for weekends, as one does. And so he's sitting there with his bronze nose fitting, or maybe gold for the Holy Roman Emperor, and they're having dinner, and they're drinking a lot, and Tycho Brahe's drinking a lot of beer and has to go to the bathroom. But you don't get up and tinkle when the Holy Roman Emperor is sitting at the table. So he stayed there, and unfortunately his bladder burst, and he died. You can look it up. It's all Wikipediable. And so, but when that happened, Kepler got his hands on the data and, among other things, formulated his famous 3 laws of planetary motion. So my father calls the bursting of Tycho Brahe's bladder, are you ready? A great break for science. Okay, so I didn't hear many groans, so I'm going to give you the triple pun. Okay? My mother had a rule at our dinner table: if anybody told 3 puns, you had to leave. Sometimes my father wanted to go up and work again, so he had to come up with a triple pun so he'd be kicked out right away. So here it is. And now this was long thought by scientists, Copernicus, Brahe, others, to be impossible. But my father went to the bowels of pundom and cracked the code. So a triple pun is 3 words, 3 puns. Are you ready? And it's going to hurt bad. Okay? So there's an astronomer, naturally, who has a cattle farm, and he's going to give it to his sons with the one condition that they name it Solar Focus. Now that's not a contrived setup at all. So his sons say, hey, dear astronomer father of ours, you're going to give us your cattle farm if we call it Solar Focus. Why? And the astronomer father says, you need to call it Solar Focus, my sons, because that's where the, are you ready? Sun's rays meet. Groans are perfectly acceptable comedy currency. Thank you very much. Okay. Can we go back to the presentation? Okay. So that's the letter from Arthur C. Clarke. In 1973, my family and Neil Armstrong's family shared 2 weeks together on a cruise ship off the coast of Africa to see an eclipse. And I found out recently from the author of First Man, both the book and the screenplay, James Hansen, that he has letters from Neil to my father, and that it was Neil who requested that my family sit with his family for the 2 weeks. So now Neil Armstrong, this is 1973. He could have sat with anybody on the ship, but he chose my father either because he was a fan of his astronomical career or because he had an interest in UFOs. Now, I was just a little whippersnapper kid, so I didn't get into many talks like that with Neil, but I'm trying to find out and get those letters and see what was going on. I also remember Isaac Asimov on the ship with his big mutton chops. And these girls asked him for his autograph, and he wrote on their thighs, Isaac Asimov was here. So this is a set of Close Encounters, and many of you may know that my father came up with that title, Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind, and he was hired as the technical advisor, and he's got a small role in the movie. And here he is on set, just having a grand old time. He was a bit hesitant, when Hollywood came calling to get involved, but he was very happy with how it turned out. And the power of works of fiction like Close Encounters and now Project Blue Book is that they sort of widen the tent. They allow more people to get in the conversation. If you write a documentary about UFOs, you're largely preaching to us. But if you have a show to which people that don't know much about it can relate to, you can bring more people into the field. It was recently re-released, and the effects hold up pretty well. So here's his little cameo with his pipe. Here's his trailer. He had a trailer. Now you can see how fancy it was. They just sort of hand wrote his name on the trailer. You know, one thing he wasn't was a diva. And here is...
I was very influenced by James.
A little snippet. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. You can search Spielberg and Hynek, and you'll find this video of Spielberg talking about how helpful my father was and how much he loved him on the set. Now, I'm making a pretty big claim here. You guys know what the Van Allen belts are, right? I own one. Yeah. James Van Allen gave one of his belts to my father. And I inherited that bad boy. So I told you some of my father's puns, but you know, that's the thing about scientists, and especially how they're portrayed. They're very warm. You know, if you met my father, he wouldn't be talking about, you know, star nebulas and clusters and things like this. He'd want to ask if you had any jokes. And that's one of the things I really wanted to get across. And this is one of my best family heirlooms. So now, I'd like to talk about Project Blue Book. How many of you folks have seen Project Blue Book, the TV show? All right. So, Project Blue Book, they approached my brother and I. Is David O'Leary here? Okay, you rat bastard. Okay. Say that in a fun way. David O'Leary is the creator of the show, and I heard a rumor he might be here now. So they approached my brother and I to be consultants on the show. And it was an interesting decision because we knew it's not going to be accurate. If you've watched the show, you know it's not accurate. But did we want to be associated with a show where we don't have any control? We can have varying degrees of influence, and we can nudge things, but we can't control it. So we decided that, yes, why pass this up? They're going to make the show. Why not get involved and exert as much influence as we can? So I asked the executive producers if we could read the scripts and go to the set, which typically you don't have consultants do, but because we both have backgrounds in entertainment, I worked in motion capture on Avatar, Lord of the Rings, and Planet of the Apes. And my brother Joel, I'll tell you about him in a little bit, we were used to Hollywood environment. So they said, sure. So they started giving us all the scripts, and we were able to give input. And what they wanted to do is find this sort of authenticity of my father and my mother, who was a figure in her own right in ufology, and then put them in highly exaggerated circumstances, but allow the authentic kernels of the characters to come through, and they'd still react more or less as they would otherwise. So you have things in the show that certainly don't happen. I mean, the first season, each is based on a real case, but not all the details of the cases are real. My father and my mother existed, and everything after that is off to the races. Okay? People ask me, was your mom cavorting with a lesbian Russian spy? To which I respond, you should see the stuff they left out. My mom was salt of the earth. But her her brother was maitre d' of Studio 54. So she saw a lot of stuff, okay? Now, most of the stuff is made up. And I'll tell you something I think I can say now because season 1 is over. You may have seen, I think it was episode 4 with Werner von Braun and that sort of dimensional time ship. That was a pretty big narrative thread that didn't come back. And the reason is, just between us girls, they hated the actor who played Werner von Braun. That's the kind of production stuff that happens. And I'll tell you just for the record, it's not super creepy at all to have a Game of Thrones supervillain play your TV father. Both my TV dad and my TV mom rock. They're fantastic. I'm very happy. And they went to great lengths to try to understand the real essential cores of the characters. So here's a picture of my brother Joel on the left, Aiden, Laura, and me at the premiere party. And you can see the tie that Aiden is wearing here. We're going to show you a little clip about this.
With Aiden Gillen, and you know him as the always scheming Littlefinger on Game of Thrones. But now he is starring as a college professor who investigates UFO sightings in the new drama Project Blue Book. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
First off, since we mentioned Game of Thrones, I have to ask you, it is like the cultural event of the year. Season 8, the final season's coming up. Now, spoiler alert, your character's killed off in the finale of season 7, but can you tell us anything about the final season? And even if not, what would you like to see happen?
And what to expect? I'd say what you should expect is the unexpected. You know, that show has made its name in pulling the rug out from under the feet of the audience. You know, it will continue to enthrall and move and surprise people. The people who make this show are so much at the top of their game now that, you know, this final season isn't going to be anything less than spectacular and hopefully surprising, but I have absolutely no idea where it's going to go.
I'm thinking I know that show, they would film all different kind of alternate endings, but I tell you this, we will be watching.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
And something else, Project Blue Book. This is so interesting. It's based on real cases in the 50s and 60s of UFO sightings, investigation by your character. It's described as X-Files in the time of Mad Men, which I love that. So we're going to take a little look at a clip.
Faster than anything I'd ever seen. And every time I tried to catch up, it would just disappear until it attacked me. I was fighting for my life.
So you're saying this, whatever it was attacking?
Now, you played Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and he led those investigations in the 50s and 60s. So what can you tell us about him?
Well, yeah, the show is centered around the emergence of the UFO phenomenon in the early 50s, the hysteria and wonder that inspired in people, the US government's reaction to that and their investigation into it. They brought in this astrophysicist called Allen Hynek, who was a college professor, to, you know, explain away, quell people's fears. You know, originally he came in as a skeptic, and his arc is he went from being a skeptic to, you know, one of the leading proponents of the UFO movement, because through his research he just found it just wasn't as simple as that. It just wasn't simple to just rubber stamp all these cases and consign them into the outbox as solved, because a lot of them weren't. Very interesting guy. He wrote several books, one of which in particular inspired Spielberg to make the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah. And
some of the cases he investigated were used as templates for stories within Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So, you know, X-Files in the time of Mad Men, yes, but also I would think Close Encounters in the 1950s would be a quite appropriate connection to make as well.
And this is also a very stylish show, and you're actually wearing one of his ties.
Yeah, okay. So this is the first time I've worn this, but I reached out to a couple of Hynek's kids, Paul and Joel. You know, I always reckoned that he must have been a great guy to have as a dad, but I wanted to know. And so who better to be in touch with than his sons, and they were very gracious, very helpful, shared some great things with me, including this tie, which is a tie he wore in the 1950s.
Well, it looks good on you.
Yeah.
How about that? And this show looks great. It's going to challenge, if you believe or not. And it is Project Blue Book. It premieres Tuesday, January 8th.
Yeah, so I also gave a brooch to TV mom, Laura Minnell. My mother liked turquoise. And I gave it to her before the season started. And in episode 10, I'm watching her. I mean, one of the weird things that happened, I mean, this was a surreal experience all around, but sometimes I'd be watching this show and I just get sort of hooked into the drama, even though I read the script like 4 months ago, and then I hear say, oh, Mimi, oh, I'm sorry, Alan. Oh, that's right, it's my parents. So I'm watching Laura in episode 10. She's got a brown jacket on and a turquoise brooch. I said, that looks really, that's my mom's. So, you know, the show has been very interesting, and I know, especially for the UFO cognoscenti, a lot of people wonder about the accuracy. You know, was the Gorman dogfights really like that? Especially Barney and Betty Hill. I don't know if Kathleen is here. But, for me, the broad strokes of the show are about a skeptical astronomer who doesn't, I say, become a believer, because that's, I don't think, what scientists are, but an acceptor of the aggregate of the data. And now my TV mother is doing the same trajectory. They made her very sort of timid in the beginning, and in the second season, she really comes into her own. So for me, the rest of it is largely fine-tuning in terms of how they portray my parents. Now, I will tell you, there was something that I read in an episode of season 2 that I thought really sort of veered from the path that we had set, and the producers were very accommodating and made that change. But the interesting thing is, by season 2, my TV father has seen so many things that my real dad hadn't seen that they are becoming different people. But you still try to maintain that authentic kernel of what makes them the way they are. And one of the things that we got as children from my father, apart from the Van Allen belt, is, he was an astronomer, and that's how he identified himself, as a scientist. UFOs were a part-time job that sort of blossomed into his latter years career, but he didn't always think of himself as the UFO guy, but really as a scientist. And I was a grand marshal for the March for Science in LA 2 years ago, like 50,000 people, and we're in these electrified Humvee vehicles in the front, starting at Pershing Square. And so I had a real bird's eye view of everybody in the crowd, and I saw all the signs they had. And one of the signs they had really stuck with me. And it said, "I'd rather have questions I can't answer than answers I can't question." Yeah, whoop it up, right? I think there are two kinds of people in the world, right? People who are okay, like, how did the universe get created? I really don't know. Are there aliens? Well, probably, but I don't know for sure. Where are they from? No idea. What are they coming here for? Unless you're an experiencer, you don't really know. And my father thought it's very important, when you're confronted with a new phenomena, to be open to the idea that it might be a new phenomena. Now, you may say he dragged his heels in the early years of Blue Book, okay? But he came to accept that. But then also, don't close the book, so to speak, too quickly, just grasping at the best available answer that you have. Because if it's a new phenomena, it might also be an intriguing, enigmatic situation that you can't answer right away. So my father started leaning towards more of an interdimensional idea. Because from a nuts and bolts astrophysics point of view, it's very difficult to come from another planet all the way here. It's a vast distance. You tweak Einstein in the nose. We have very sensitive instrumentation to detect objects entering and leaving our atmosphere, and we don't have the sort of associated reports like that with the sightings that we have of these kind of Cheshire cat-like apparitions. Plus, these crafts exhibit a lot of comfort in our Earth gravity and environment. So for an astronomer, these are non-trivial problems. Now, my father was convinced, obviously, that there's something to the phenomena, but he thought it might be even more exotic than, I don't want to say simply extraterrestrials, but maybe interdimensional. And I find that a fascinating idea, and that's something that my dear family friend Jacques Vallée also thought. So it was this kind of inquisitive and open attitude, sort of like a healthily skeptical mind. And one of the things he also helped me understand is, take time to believe something that you want to be true. It's really easy to convince yourself of something if you want it to be true. So subject those beliefs to more rigorous standards for your own benefit. But remain open that there may be something there. Okay, so back to the show, my good friends. Michael? So I've read all the scripts and become friends with the cast and the producers. I've been to set a few times, and I'll show you a picture in a second, and I've done a lot of publicity for the show. One of the most engaging ones, well, I think I have a slide of it. So I did viewing parties in Los Angeles. How many of you folks live in LA? One hand? 2, 3 hands? Okay. All of you folks are invited to the next viewing party if you want to come for the first episode of season 2. Yeah, all 3 of you. Yeah, we got capacity. So we had, the network executive, David O'Leary, the creator. Michael Malarkey, who plays Captain Quinn. And here's something interesting. Michael Malarkey, who plays Captain Quinn, was raised 10 miles from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Isn't that cool? And my brother Joel. So I moderated a panel with there. We had about 130 people here watching that episode. I was an Emcee of a high-tech film festival. And so we did a panel discussion at the film festival as well. And Michael Harney, on the far left, who plays Captain Valentine, who's also in lots of movies and TV shows, Orange is the New Black. He plays one of the generals who may have to off my father. And so I talked to him about the role, and it turns out he was a fan of my father in college, and he's nothing like the general's character. But you know how when you portray somebody, if you portray them as a two-dimensional villain, it's just not really that helpful. You have to sort of find out what their sort of, albeit misguided, heroic journey is. And if you think about it from an Air Force general's point of view, just talk about disclosure before we even use that word. If you're sitting on that secret and you got this rogue astronomer in Ohio who may blab about it, during a swamp gas conference. Yes, I said the words swamp and gas. What would you do? What would you not do to prevent that? This is an ongoing national security matter. It could rip the fabric of society apart. Well, I think, to be blunt, you would take care of that situation and sleep just fine that night. So just imagine those kind of concerns swirling around, and then you have the Men in Black as well. Let me go back here. So one of the most resonant things I did for the show last year was in November, we went to Chicago and we aired the first episode to a theater full of the press. And then I moderated a panel with the cast on stage in Chicago. And that was the first time I'd spoken publicly in Chicago since my mother's memorial service. And there are people in the audience who had my father as an astronomer at Northwestern. And the next day we had lots of interviews for TV and radio. And in the morning we had a press handler shuttling reporters in and out of a hotel suite. And one of the reporters comes in and we're all sitting there, the cast and I sitting on a big couch. And the guy says, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I know you guys are stars, but I'm really only here to interview Paul." Because he was a local Chicago reporter. So it was just super fun. So I went to the set 2 weeks ago, and this is if you can see in the background, you might recognize that's Area 51. Now that's actually Vancouver with a few tumbleweeds. And for all I know, it looks exactly like Area 51. And I'm going back there 2 weeks from today, and I'll tell you, I hear the name Hynek more often than at a family reunion, because it's like, Hynek to the set, Hynek over here, Hynek over here. And it's really, really fun. It's been a great experience, and hopefully the trajectory of my father and mother's characters keep going in a super positive direction. Okay, now I want to talk about what our family life at home was really like. If you've watched the show, they have a son named Joel. Joel's kind of a timid kid. At least he doesn't have that Hollywood bowl cut. He hides in the closet and reads Flash Gordon. Oh, so something else I want to tell you about the show. You may have seen in episode 3 that Mimi goes into the hardware store to buy a bomb shelter. And it turns out they actually did sell wooden bomb shelters. Different time. And so she's in the store, and in the script that I read, it talks about how she wants to get the bomb shelter, and the clerk mansplains to her, "Well, wait till your hubby," because she says her husband's out of town. He says, "Wait till your hubby comes home, and I'll be happy to give it to him." And I said, my mom would not have tolerated that in any era. And so I punched up the line, and what the line came out in the show was, "Well, hubby's out of town, and wifey wants to build it now, so you'll explain it to me right here and now." So 2 of my family members called me up afterwards and said, "That's exactly what Mom would have said." I said, "Yes, nailed it." So this is the 5 of us kids in Canada. My father bought a summer cabin in northern Ontario, And so we've been going there all of our lives. And this is one place that my father really treasured. Here's a picture that my father took of our family in Chicago. Here's another one. And, oh, yeah, so that's me on the right, swashbuckling in our backyard. Now I'm going to show you a couple more pictures of that yard in less of a pristine state than this. So here is digging holes in the backyard. That's me on the far right and my brother Joel in the hole. And you may wonder what that apparatus is. Right here is a lawnmower engine, and he's hooked up a pulley system so we can fill up the buckets of dirt at the bottom of the hole, and then that would pull them up automatically. Now you might say, what did your father think of this? I don't think he even knew. He traveled a lot. Now we would start burrowing under. So my mom had one rule, and that rule was if she looked in the hole and she couldn't see every body part of everybody in the hole, we had to fill in the hole and start digging a new one, because that would give her time to regroup. Now, one thing I've told the show is, look, there's a lot you can, so I asked the showrunner, Sean, if my character will appear. And he looks at me and he goes, I love you, Paul, but you're not going to be born. I said, don't say that, this sounds super creepy. You're not going to be born? Jeez. So, but I've told them that we did so many things, and here's another example of what's going on in our household. So, Joel in the show, and I know this is sort of a white overlay right now. In the show, Joel's sort of timid and hiding in the closet. In real life, my brother Joel was building jet engines in the backyard. So that's Joel right there. Now, here in the insert, you can see my mom, me, and my little brother all looking off in different directions or having breakfast cereal. Because what did we call this? Tuesday. So I've told them, look, there's all kinds of things going on that you could do with our kids. You know, my brother, Scott, has a PhD from MIT. You could do all kinds of things where the kids are, not me, I'm a French major. You could do all kinds of things where the kids doing science experiments, you know, with a Jacob's ladder or something else, and then my father sees that and extrapolates from that to a much more complex level to reverse engineer the propulsion system of a UFO, perhaps. So we'll see. But if it does, it'll come from my born brother Joel. Okay, and now I want to talk a little bit about some of the legacy. So I love to talk about and pat my older brother Joel on the back. He has an Oscar for visual effects, and here he is accepting his Oscar. He's in the second from the right there. My brother Joel created what I think is the most iconic visual effect of all time in movies, and that's bullet time from The Matrix. You know, I think that's had more impact than any other single visual effect. And what happened was Joel conceived, the Wachowski then brothers conceived the effect, he created it, and the other ones, the main effects in the movie, and then his company said, okay, you kind of figured that out, go do the visual effects on this other movie. So his assistant took over and won the Oscar for visual effects for The Matrix. But Joel won the Oscar for the other movie they worked on, which is called What Dreams May Come. And I remember him showing me these early tests from both movies, and The Matrix I could understand. Okay, it's this guy going slowly with bullets whizzing by. But I don't know if you've seen What Dreams May Come. Okay, it's a beautiful movie. The art design is beautiful. It's a cool story. But if you're watching an early visualization of this, it's basically you're in heaven, and heaven for you is a Hieronymus Bosch painting that's continuously being rebrushed. And it's just this amazing, amazing, beautiful impact. So I mentioned Jacques Vallée. I'm sure many of you have heard of Jacques Vallée. Many of you may know him. Long, long time friend of our family. And here I've been asked to be at an artificial intelligence conference. And I said, well, I could talk about AI and UFOs, not knowing really what I'd say. And I thought, why don't I get Jacques to come along, because he has a PhD in AI from Northwestern. I mean, I don't think there's anybody better in the world to talk about AI and UFOs than Jacques Vallée. And so I've now done several panels with him, one at Contact in the Desert as well with Richard Dolan. And it was really emotional for me to be on stage with Jacques, because I thought that's my father's role. I mean, I can talk about my dad and all that, but to be on stage with Jacques was a very, very emotional moment for me. And one of the things that made me feel a little bit more relaxed was looking at his socks. Look at those. And look at mine. Jacques gave me these. Yes, these are Jacques' socks. Now, I don't know if you can see, but the other side of them is really weird. It's like these things dying of cannabis. So I don't know what he's trying to tell me. I mean, those days are long over for me. So Earl Grey, who did these kind of trippy images of my dad, also had me speak at MUFON, and I sent this to a friend of mine. He said, dude, you look like a mystical alien wizard man. I've been called a lot worse than that in my life. So here I'm holding what is purported to be, well, in the same outfit, it looks like, an artifact from a crashed saucer. And the person who has this has changed her will so that it will come to me eventually. I hope it's a long time, because she's a dear friend of the family. And so I'm getting involved now more actively in investigations. I'm going to Argentina in November, and hope to work with Kevin Day. Are you here? So I hope to work with Kevin Day soon on a really, really super cool project. So I'm holding this artifact, and I'll tell you, it's super light. Now, I don't know jack diddly about metallurgy, but apparently some initial tests show that there are continuously growing nanofibers in the material. I don't even know exactly what that means, but it sounds really cool. So I've always been interested in UFOs. I've been with my father to lots of conferences. And at our house, you know, we had Travis Walton, who may be here. He's here today. We had Father Gill, who was an incredible man. And I remember taking the call from Calvin Parker, who I know is here somewhere. There's Calvin. Hi, Calvin. And as I told Calvin, I mean, Calvin's case is amazing. And Calvin, you have a new book coming out on Monday, is that right? Okay, so everybody hear that? Calvin Parker from Pascagoula, Mississippi has a new book coming out on Monday. Whoop, yeah. And more witnesses have come forward to corroborate his account. And something Calvin told me backstage before I came on, the incident in 1973 happened, what, at 11 p.m.? 11 p.m. And how soon thereafter was my father on site?
On October 12th, which was the Palmer Day, it was at 6:47 a.m.
So it happened at 11 p.m., and my dad was there at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. I mean, that's dedication.
I don't know how he done it. I mean, you can't take that thing down, just get in through customs like that.
You know, he must have been somewhere in the area, but still, how did he hear about it that late on a Sunday night? And that's something I just learned today. I think that's fascinating. And so I want to say sorry to Calvin after all these years, because when he called our house, I was playing kickball outside in the backyard. So I go running inside, and I pick up the phone, and it's Calvin, and he's talking very slowly because he's, you know, been traumatized, as one would be. I'm just this snotty little kid playing with my friends, and he starts telling me he wants to talk to my dad. Well, my dad's not here. I'll take a message for you. And I said, where are you calling from? And it sounded like the longest word in the world, Pascagoula. And I'm writing it out, and I'm just trying to get his number because I want to go back out and play kickball with my friends, because this stuff happened all the time. So sorry if I was a little bit abrupt on the phone, Calvin. Yeah, my pleasure. Call anytime. So, and thanks for telling me about my father getting down there so quickly. I think that's awesome. And my father really loved the case. He thought it was one of the most impressive cases he'd ever seen. You know, people ask me which cases he liked. He liked that. He liked Lonnie Zamora and Socorro and Father Gill. And I'll mention something about Father Gill because he came to the house, and I was able to sit down and talk with him for a long time. And some of you may know the Father Gill case in 1959 in Papua New Guinea. Okay, so I'll give you the sort of the mile-high story. So basically, Father Gill is an Anglican missionary or priest in Papua New Guinea. And he's inside, and he hears a commotion outside. He goes outside, and there's a lot of the inhabitants looking up at a craft floating in the sky, maybe about 500 feet high. And Father Gill was taking contemporaneous notes of what he's seeing and using trigonometry to determine how high it is and how far it is, etc. And maybe 500 witnesses. And at some point, a hatch opens up, and creatures come out. Father Gill waves, and they wave back. And I think there were other sightings in countries that sort of establish a vector, and then maybe a sighting the next night, and that's more or less it. And it's become a very well-known case, and people have come up with all kinds of explanations. And at one point, Father Gill went inside, and people asked, well, why would you go back inside? And he said, well, I thought you Yanks were working on some special project. I didn't really know what it was. Plus, he had evening prayers, and his oaths weren't do evening prayers unless you see something funny in the sky. They were do your evening prayers. So he comes to dinner at our house, and he came for an ecumenical religious conference. So he comes to our house for dinner. Well, if you come to the Hynek house for dinner, and you're Calvin Parker or Travis Walton or Father Gill, you know you're going to have to talk about something in particular. So, and I'm sitting there, and I'd already watched my dad talk to witnesses. He wouldn't say interrogate or question. Those sort of set up an adversarial attitude. But he would sort of ask questions, and I could see him sort of evaluating. And then I started looking at Father Gill through the same lens. This is a man who had nothing to gain from the incident, who was very comfortable in his own skin, who was clearly intelligent. And I could see from the way my father asked questions that his accounts were remarkably similar over the years. I mean, this is the definition of a credible witness. My father would also sort of poke fun at the Air Force a little bit when they denied the reports of Air Force pilots, because they're basically denying the reports of people they themselves have trained, right? So I'm watching this man, and I'm thinking, this man has no reason to lie. He's very comfortable in his lot in life, and he's very intelligent. It just doesn't make any sense. So that really spoke to the credibility of the witness. And when you have people like that, or Travis, or Calvin, I think most of us here are positively inclined to the possibility of UFOs, but so much of it comes down to, even more than perhaps radar corroboration, just how credible the witness is. Okay, back to the slides, my good friend. So, this is my house in Calabasas, California. I know, it's lovely, right? A friend of mine said, why do you have that ugly-looking window by your front door? And there's a lot of things on your house, perhaps, that you don't even notice until someone brings it up. And I said, yeah, that looks kind of goofy. So I got like an address thing to cover it up, but then that window leads to a bathroom inside. So now I have a window inside that has no light coming through it, and it doesn't make sense as a window. So what does a Hynek do? He gets a framed poster of a window with a UFO. That's how we do it. Some of my earliest memories are UFO ornaments on the Christmas tree. This is the family business. So here, anybody know what this is? Besides a mess in a garage somewhere? Okay, so there's a Tesla coil. There's hint number 1. Hint number 2 is a superconductor. And hint number 3, that's a can of 7-Up. So how many of you have heard of Claude Poher? Everybody, okay, good. Claude Poher is a French astrophysicist and a leading researcher of UFOs. And he has published papers about his experiments with what he calls universons, which are a particle that can produce limitless energy. So Hoyt Yateman, who, like my brother, has an Oscar for visual effects, decided he wanted to reverse engineer Claude Poher's experiments, or replicate them. So he asked my brother to help. My brother's a genius with electronics, and I kind of wormed my way in there by saying I'd be junior lab boy assistant. So we started doing these experiments, and Hoyt machined all this stuff in his garage. And basically, the basic principle is you have a superconductor and a semiconductor submerged in liquid nitrogen, And the sort of differential between them helps, I don't think create, but I think harness existing universons, and that creates an anti-gravity machine. So we started doing these experiments, and I got to tell you, I got pretty good at ladling the liquid nitrogen. So we're doing these experiments, and we filmed them, and one of the experiments produced a shock. Now we had a water, they were vertical like this, and we had a water tank underneath to see if anything would come so we could see the ripples in the water. We saw some ripples in the water, and we saw a spark. Now, it could be because the plates were too close and the spark was able to jump between them. I mean, there's all kinds of potential explanations. And really, the odds that Poher is correct, I don't know, 1%, 2%. The odds that we're going to replicate what he's doing without full materials, again, maybe 1%. So it's like your Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours that you're looking at. And we've done it for a few afternoons, but it was fun. It's fun to go to someone's house and, yeah, we're going to work on anti-gravity today. Now, I told this to Jacques, and Jacques, not only as a UFO researcher and writer and author, he's a venture capitalist. And he said he knows 2 companies in Silicon Valley that are working, 2 startups that are working on anti-gravity. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with financial gravity, but startups, if they're going to get money, they have to have a business plan. They have to have financial models. And I do this stuff all the time. I would love to see the financial model of a startup that got money to do anti-gravity. I met a guy named Flint Dilley, who's a really brilliant guy, a game designer. He told me he went and met with the Pentagon. And the Pentagon was doing war planning scenarios with game designers to try to be more creative. And Flint is talking with one of the generals who said, I have responsibility for China, but China's too big. I can't fly over the whole country without refueling. And I don't like refueling. So I'm going to create a 5-year commission to crack the nut on anti-gravity. Now, I have no idea if he figured out anti-gravity or not. But what I thought was fascinating was that he sort of calibrated it in his mind as not a 10, 20-year, but 5-year project. So what other kind of things is he working on? Right? Okay, I think we have one last slide. Yeah, this is another image from my friend Earl Grey at MUFON, who's taking these photos and just adding some art overlays to them. I just think they're super trippy. So with that, I'd like to conclude. I think we have a little bit of time for questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Paul, thanks for being here. I knew your father. I saw him on the Dick Cavett show after he got out of and the government closed down Project Blue Book about 1969. He started QFOS, the Center for UFO Studies. Right. It was something quite different where the police agencies would get a call about a UFO. The police agencies under his organization had an 800 number to call, and then they could possibly call an investigator nearby or what have you. I wrote an article for UFO magazine out of England, and in that, it was called, the article was called Swamp Gas Revisited, and I called your father the grandfather of ufology. Yes, we know that he was a debunker to start, but he changed his mind after a while, and I respected him so much. The reason was basically he was one of the few people who said this stuff, this UFO stuff, needs to be studied. Study it. And of course, he was often laughed at. I heard him talk at many conferences. He sometimes would begin with the political cartoons that came out after the swamp gas incident, and he would leave the audience laughing, rolling in the aisles, and then he would get serious and say, now let's get down to business, and talk about some of his great cases. I had some other things, but they've kind of escaped my mind. But I really respected Alan Hynek.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I think I have a lot of respect for anybody who as an adult changes their mind about something important, whatever they change, and admit they're wrong. And we've seen now in current affairs, there are some people that don't like to admit that they're wrong. So I think that's just a very good trait. I saw a video recently of my father in Manitoba. There was an eclipse that we went to when I was a kid. And I don't know what happened, but he gave an hour-long presentation like this. Comes on stage and he says, "Hello, my name is Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and UFOs are a very interesting topic. Now I'll take questions." And he answered questions for an hour. Now, maybe he lost his presentation or he just decided to change it up, but I like that kind of intellectual flexibility.
Have you been keeping track of what happened to the Center for UFO Studies after Hynek died? I heard a brigadier took over the center, but there hasn't been a follow-up, or whether the records have been sent to another research facility?
Yes. So the Center for UFO Studies, now the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, is run by Mark Rodiger, the scientific director.
Yes, that's the name.
Right, who's a good friend of mine. And yeah, they're doing what they can. Some of the cases are missing, and some of the cases from APRO are missing also. And I'd like to retrieve those and add them to the available body of literature and get them in the hands of Michael Schratt. Some of you may know Michael Schratt. Michael Schratt is a brilliant guy who is painstakingly taking existing UFO cases, making these beautiful one-page summaries and sometimes 3D models. So he's presented a lot of these to me, and I'll tell you there's a big gulf of difference between a case when you read it in just sort of like it's typed or it's handwritten, and when you see it in this format where you see an image, some key stats, and a summary, and then hold a three-dimensional object in your hands. It's a completely different way to look at it. So Center for UFO Studies, I'm also close with MUFON, and the more of these groups that we have, the more that we can unite them together, the better we all are.
Thank you.
That was pretty cool stuff there, Paul. I read what was it, the UFO Experience or the Flying Saucer, the book he wrote, very good book. Mentioned a case in Kentucky that fascinated him with the hillbillies and the shooting at the aliens.
You know, Steven Spielberg almost did a movie about Kelly Hopkinsville.
Wow.
They worked on it for a year after Close Encounter.
And just a quick question, what's with is Vancouver becoming the new Hollywood, and is the labor cheaper up there or something?
2 words, tax credits.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. So
I knew there was a financial reason for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, they make they got some good scenery up there.
Yeah.
And what's with that? Is that a Canadian Ford?
Sorry?
The Ford with the Mercury grill. The Ford in the picture.
Oh, I don't know what it was, but I'll tell you.
Take a look at it. It's a 50 Ford, but it's got a Mercury grill.
Oh yeah. So.
And Canadian Fords are a little different. Cars.
The day that they were filming the sort of car where my father's being chased in the car, it was really interesting. It was the same day we did some inside shots in the hangar. Right across from that, there's this open field with a bunch of bald eagles in Canada, a bunch of the bald eagles. And Aiden is driving the car, and he's being chased, and he keeps driving it again and again. He keeps coming over after each take and chatting with us, and then he walks away with a sort of a trench coat and a hat, and as he's walking away, I felt my father.
Wow.
It was really eerie. I'll tell you one more story. I think we have time for one more story.
I'll get away from the mic. Somebody else.
Okay. So, you know, I showed you an image from Canada, and when my father died, we spread his ashes over the lake, which was his wish. And when we did that, we looked up and we saw a rainbow. Now, for an astronomer, that's pretty cool. And the other thing was, my father, like Mark Twain, came and went with Halley's Comet, which really helps a grieving child, right? So fast forward 10 years later, my mother dies. And we put her ashes in the same place in the same lake. We look up, and what do we see? A rainbow. We look up 5 minutes later, and we see another one. We go back to the cabin, and the younger generation of kids are there, and one of them says to us, and comes running up to us, "Hey, look, I found this picture I drew of Mimi a couple years ago with a rainbow." So when I was with one of the producers of Project Blue Book, the first time I went to the set, and we're walking over to have lunch, she asked me, hey, what would your parents think of the show? And I said, I think my father would put on his slippers and his robe, sit in his easy boy chair, and say, oh, this is a rollicking good time. My mother would say, oh, it's a bunch of nonsense. You don't need me in there. So as we're walking to have lunch, I told the producer what I thought candidly my parents would think, and we look up and we see a rainbow. And to me, that meant my father was happy, but my mom didn't care about it. Okay. Calvin.
This really don't contain the aliens or UFOs. I got the pleasure of meeting Dr. Hynek and spending about 12 hours with him and trying to look into his personality. When you talk to him, he gives you a stone face when he looks and never changes expressions. Was that always his way, or was that his way of just showing kind of interest in things?
Not with those kids. He changed his expression quite a lot.
Yeah, he never did. I mean, you spend 12 hours with a man, you expect a little smile or a sniffle, but he never even batted his eyes.
So it was like a poker face?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think he was more or less doing it to see how I felt about things. So
yeah, because I mean, he would tell me, but like he didn't try to want to lead people like with what he thought might be the case. You know, not like in like post-hypnotic suggestions, sort of plant ideas.
Right.
And I mean, you had such a traumatic experience, and he's there the next morning. Did you feel comfortable with him? How was it?
I felt very comfortable and relaxed around him. Comfortable enough when he left that I would call sometime and talk to him because he was the only one I felt I could talk to. But then again, he scared me.
Thank you, Calvin. Calvin Parker. Thank you, everybody.